Russia's food inflation has lost its brakes. This is how experts describe the current situation, as quoted by the Moscow Times. According to the Russian statistics agency, the annual rise in bread and milk prices since winter 2023 has set a record. The figures have risen by 11% on average. From last summer to July 2024, beef prices rose by 14%, chicken eggs by 38%, cucumbers by 32%, and bananas by 41%. According to the latest polls conducted by Inform, about a quarter of Russians can afford to buy food, but not clothes or shoes.
The accelerating rise in food prices is on a wide scale: pork, dairy products, sunflower oil, bread. Despite the ban on petrol exports, it continues to rise in price ahead of inflation, but with a slight tendency to slow down. The growth of prices for building materials is also steadily increasing, from the report of MMI Analytical Center.
Among the reasons for the rise in inflation is the investment of huge amounts of money into the military sector. Experts believe, in fact, the Kremlin itself has created a vicious circle, which it has been walking around for several years now. On one hand, the money invested into the military-industrial complex literally burns up at the front in the form of tanks and armored vehicles. A considerable amount of money is also spent on the production of missiles, which the Russian army uses to terrorize the civilian population of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the salaries of those employed in the military sector put additional strain on the economy and also lead to inflation. On the other hand, the Kremlin does not intend to stop the war against Ukraine, which means that it has to raise payments to mobilized people and cope with the consequences of hostilities on its own territory.
If you look from the point of view of the consolidated budget and its expenditures without salaries, only the first one-off payment for 100,000 people has already reached 250 billion rubles. This is not a small amount of money at all. Salaries are plus $1 trillion there, roughly speaking. This shows how much this staff shortage can be measured from different angles. Apparently, against this background, another billion or 2 billion for displaced people from the Kursk region is already a problem for them. They need new billions for so many needs, and they don't know where to find it.
The Russian central bank continues its attempts to stop inflation by raising the key rate in the conditions of a full-scale war against Ukraine, staff shortage, and the economy's transition to manual control by the state. So far, experts say it has been unsuccessful.
5.2% in less than 8 months. That's already in fact the accumulated inflation this year. That's about 1.5 times higher than it was last year. And I will remind you that just to pay off last year's inflation, which at that moment was 3.7%, the central bank introduced all these crazy rates, which was terrible, but now it is higher in July, even excluding the growth of housing and utilities prices. Inflation was still higher than in previous months. In other words, the inflationary background there is not going anywhere.
Even Federation officials recognize the fact that the inflation is out of control is being recognized even by Federation officials, but not by Putin himself. Following the latest meeting between the Kremlin dictator and the central bank authorities, Putin instructed the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, to stabilize the situation and stop price rises.
I don't know what was on Elvira Nabiullina's face at that moment and what emotions she was feeling, because she has been talking for over a year now about the overheating of the economy and the fact that additional monetary incentives do not lead to an increase in industrial output, but only drive up prices. Among other things, Nabiullina broke her tongue talking about the shortage of personnel, and this is one of the main factors why there is simply no one to increase output. She also pointed out many other problems, but Putin wants to hear only what is pleasing to his ears. Maxime Plant, publicist, economic observer, in an interview with Voice of America.
Experts note that Russia's overheating economy is not like the classical one, as it is caused by enormous spendings on the war. The Kremlin clearly does not intend to stop the hostilities, which means that the wallets of ordinary Russians will continue to empty. Reported by Anastasia Tarnavska, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.